Good evening and welcome back. If you are just joining us, today's confirmation hearing for Pete Hegseth delivered one of the most revealing exchanges yet on border security, military spending, and what building the wall actually means on the ground. Before we go any further, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you do not miss our in-depth breakdowns of these hearings and the real-world implications behind them.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Vasquez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I understand that the border is a top priority for you and the Department of Defense. Well, it's also one of my top priorities in my border district. That's why I've introduced bipartisan legislation to stop fentanyl at the border, secure our ports of entry, hire more CBP personnel, and combat the cartels, areas that I'm sure we agree on. Now, DOD has spent more than $525 million from the defense budget on military operations on the border. You've done it by diverting over $1 billion from military modernization and quality of life programs like housing. And as such, I'm sure you're well informed as to what your warfighters are doing on our border and the characteristics of the border itself. Secretary Hegseth, do you know how many border miles there are in New Mexico?
Not the exact number of miles.
Can you give me a round figure?
Hundreds.
Okay, 180 miles. Can you tell me where the border wall starts and ends on this map of New Mexico?
I'm not properly oriented to your map, but I know that unfortunately, because of the administration previous, they did not have the opportunity to finish the border wall.
Thank you,
let it rust
Secretary.
on the ground instead of
Thank you,
putting it up,
Secretary. And you have been to
defending
New
our border.
Mexico. Could you tell me where in New Mexico you've been to?
I've been to the border twice to look at once at our national defense area down there because I can't recall a time when a Secretary of Defense has gone down in the first 4 or 5 months of his tenure to the border to better understand.
Was that in
the
an urban
situation
area
there.
or in a rural area?
Both areas, traversed rural areas and urban
Okay,
areas.
so you must be
Some
familiar-
with walls, some without.
Secretary.
And if President Trump was actually supported, we'd have a
Thank
border
you, Secretary. I reclaim my time. So the most remote part of New Mexico is called the Bootheel. And I'm not sure that you spent any time in the Bootheel of New Mexico. Mr. Secretary, I was raised on the border. I've lived there my whole life. I've worked alongside ranchers, farmers, landowners, wildlife biologists, and other stakeholders for over a decade. I headed a border security task force in my district before coming to Congress. I've traveled with Border Patrol on ATVs. I've hunted the border on horseback and hiked dozens of miles in the most remote stretches of the border in this region. Now, do you happen to know why there hasn't been a border wall built in the Bootheel?
Well, based on what you just described, you should be a big fan of what our administration is.
Well, Secretary, I'm asking why a border wall has not been built. Funds have been allocated for other parts of the border.
Here's what I know. Our commanders on the ground and others and our engineers would understand what goes where and why, and where there should be a border wall, there will be a border wall.
Okay,
it will be
Secretary,
funded through reconciliation.
Secretary, are you
President
familiar
Trump
with the
is gonna
Animas
deliver
Mountains,
on it.
with Alamo Hueco, with San Luis Mountains, with Guadalupe Pass or Long Canyon?
Again,
Critical border areas.
I'm aware that there are gaps in different places where walls are not as effective as other places, and I get that.
Thank
We're
you,
applying
Secretary.
infrastructure
I appreciate your answer
where it
on that.
makes the most sense because
Thank
we're
you.
going to get 100% operational
Thank you,
control of the border.
Secretary. So you agree then that a border wall doesn't make sense for the entire country?
I think we need a border wall across our entire border.
Okay, so you should know then why it's almost physically impossible to build a border across the Animas Mountains and the terrain challenges that that poses and the billions of dollars. Do you know if there's roads on those mountains currently?
If we're going to spend money as a government,
Okay.
it should be
I'll take that as a no.
secure our southern border.
Well, the point I'm trying to make, Secretary, is that if this is so important to the military, and you as Secretary of the Department of Defense should know more about the border. Mr. Secretary, I urge you to skip the photo ops next time that you go to a port of entry and spend time on the ground in places like the Diamond Day Ranch.
I think you should ask the soldiers on the border whether they've been photo op visits or not, because I spent a lot
Secretary-
of time on the ground
Secretary,
with
are
the
you-
soldiers, getting an understanding of what
Secretary,
they're
I'm
facing,
gonna
what
ask
they're
you a
doing,
question
what
that-
their capabilities
Secretary,
are.
I reclaim
not
my
for a
time.
photo op.
Thank you.
As a
Secretary, I
Secretary of
reclaim my
Defense to
time.
understand what our
Chairman,
troops
may I
do
reclaim my
and
time?
why.
Gentleman
they
reclaims
do it.
his time.
Thank you. Secretary, do you know what a tethered aerostat system is?
I do.
Okay. Well, great. Then you know that this type of surveillance technology is superior to having thousands of troops sitting in trucks looking at an empty desert. I've requested funds for more tethered aerostat systems. We haven't had a response from your department. Are you familiar with ASTs?
What's an AST?
Well, it's an autonomous surveillance tower. They're equipped with these advanced cameras that have the capability to relay critical information to border agents on the ground. And this type of technology is badly needed on the Bootheel. And it's a much better expenditure than a border wall is.
I've seen that. I've seen those towers in use.
Great. Well, these technologies have been described to me by both Border Patrol and CBP as force multipliers, allowing their personnel to focus on law enforcement efforts while leaving this mundane surveillance task to much more efficient and cost-effective technology, a much more efficient way to surveil that part of the border. Now, Mr. Secretary, I have serious concerns with your fundamental lack of knowledge about the U.S.-Mexico border, considering the billions of dollars that DOD is slated to spend on this mission, with little clarity to those of us who live there. I would encourage you to do some homework on my region and learn what will actually make our border more secure and more safe. Thank you, Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair.
The moment came when Congressman Gabe Vasquez of New Mexico took the floor. Unlike many border debates that stay abstract, Vasquez brought the conversation down to geography, lived experience, and hard facts. He represents a border district and made it clear that border security is not a talking point for him. It is personal. He opened by noting that he has introduced bipartisan legislation to stop fentanyl trafficking, secure ports of entry, hire more customs and border protection personnel, and combat cartels, areas where there is broad agreement across party lines. Then, he pivoted to the Department of Defense. Vasquez pointed out that more than $525 million has already been spent on military operations at the border, with over $1 billion diverted from military modernization and quality of life programs like housing. That framing matters because it highlights a trade-off that often gets lost in political slogans. Border operations are not free. They come at the expense of other defense priorities. Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe. These details are easy to miss unless you are watching closely, and we break them down so you do not have to. Vasquez then tested Hegseth's familiarity with the border itself. He asked a simple question: how many miles of border does New Mexico have? Hegseth could not give a number. The answer is about 180 miles. When asked to identify where the border wall begins and ends on a map of New Mexico, Hegseth struggled again, citing map orientation and shifting quickly to criticism of the previous administration for not finishing the wall. This is where the exchange became less about politics and more about credibility. Vasquez pressed further, asking where exactly Hegseth had visited in New Mexico. Hegseth said he had been to the border twice, both urban and rural areas. Vasquez then reclaimed his time and introduced a critical concept that rarely makes it into national debates: the Bootheel. The Bootheel is the most remote part of New Mexico, a rugged region of mountains, canyons, wildlife corridors, and private ranch land. Vasquez explained that he was raised on the border, has worked alongside ranchers and landowners, led a border security task force, traveled with Border Patrol and ATVs, hunted on horseback, and hiked dozens of miles through this terrain. This was not rhetorical flair, it was context. He was establishing that border security looks very different in places like the Bootheel than it does near urban crossings. Subscribe now if you value this kind of context, because it is exactly what gets lost in soundbite politics. Vasquez then asked the key question: why has no border wall been built in the Bootheel? Hegseth avoided a direct answer, saying engineers and commanders on the ground decide where walls make sense, and promising that a wall would be funded through reconciliation. When pressed about specific geographic features like the Animas Mountains, the Alamo Hueco Mountains, Guadalupe Pass, and Long Canyon, Hegseth acknowledged that there are gaps where walls are less effective, and this is where the contradictions surfaced. Vasquez led him to the logical conclusion that a border wall does not make sense everywhere. Hegseth initially seemed to agree that walls are applied where they make the most sense, but moments later, he stated flatly that he believes the United States needs a border wall across the entire border. On the other hand, political messaging often demands absolutes: a wall everywhere, total coverage, 100% operational control. Before we wrap up this segment, subscribe to the channel so you stay informed on how these policy contradictions play out beyond the hearing room. What viewers should take away from this exchange is that border security is not just about barriers. In remote regions like southern New Mexico, walls can be impractical, environmentally damaging, and less effective than technology, personnel, and intelligence-driven enforcement. The hearing exposed a gap between political rhetoric and operational reality, and it raised serious questions about how defense dollars are being used and what trade-offs are being made in the name of border security. We will continue following this confirmation process closely and breaking down what it really means for national security, border communities, and the military. Subscribe now so you do not miss our next update.